Shri B.S. Lali, Dr. Sanjay Sethi, Dr. Sanjay Srivastav in absentia, Dr. Shalini Trivedi, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. I am not a very flamboyant speaker, so I apologize in the beginning for the boarding spell of time that you are going to have with me. For next about half an hour or so. I'm a very unlucky person, having spent nearly 35 years in the profession. There are people, although I don't deserve, they love me, and they keep calling me. And what they do is, they ask me to talk about something about which no one knows in the world, neither do I, or to speak on something which is known to everybody, and everybody knows everything or something about it. So you can see my plight. If I am asked to speak on something about which nobody knows, I don't know anything about it either. And if there is something about which everybody knows, what new thing can I tell you? So with this preamble, I thought that like Srimad Bhagavad Katha, which is so well known to everybody, yet is repeated and repeated and repeated. And each time you repeat it, perhaps some newer insights come to you, perhaps some new bhav gets its upaj, as they say, and perhaps something worthwhile may be noticed. I have structured my talk mostly for the benefit of my young friends. Of course, there is nothing new that I am going to talk about. Everything is known to you, or can be known to you with a little effort. Everything is available in the literature, in the library. Yet, I have tried to put them together, and in about half an hour or so, I'll quickly give you a rundown, and if you take a mental note of these things, maybe this will look like a classroom lecture to you, so maybe boring, and I have already apologized, and I apologize once again. Well, to pick up a thread, I was trying to apologize once again to my senior colleagues and friends, and request kindly to bear with me. Well, so let's run through this. This is broadly the structure of the half of the presentation. I wish to draw your attention to this definition, nothing new. What is worth noting is the inverted commas that I have put on factual. Case is a factual description of events that actually happened at some point in the past. And I wish to posit that it is basically the distinction between the fact and the description. that makes the process of a case study interesting. What I mean to say is that there is something called a fact, and fact is nothing but a consensus between the subjective perceivers who together perceive that so-called fact and make a reportage. So, how to make the description closer to the fact, that is of interest in the process of case study. What is a basic learning objective? To stimulate and nourish one's own mental elaborations of knowledge and helping in the capacity to monitor and guide one's own and others' learning and thinking. I hope at a later time point in the events that are to take place today, the evaluators of the case will keep some of these points in mind. Case types. Case is a research study with a sample size n equal to 1. This 1n could be a particular event, situation, or a selection of individuals. And a case can be descriptive, evaluative, or decision-focused. I urge to you that we should try not to confuse between these three types of cases because the purpose differs. One should also make a distinction between the consumers of a case, such as the general readers, research-oriented people, and policy implications. At the end of this talk, I will, time permitting, I will try to present before you a small snippet which will give you some idea of how the distinction between the consumers of a case can make a difference between in the implications and value of a case. This point I have mentioned earlier also. A case is a description of a fact and of a real situation. You know and I know, everybody else knows, that hypothetical cases are available. But make no mistake about it, a case may disguise some or most of the facts, but the core of a good case always remains real. And fictitious cases have been used in classrooms and in other settings, but they don't have the same potentiality as a case that describes a real situation has. The same idea has been reiterated here. Research as an anthropology. Case research is much like that presented by anthropologists. And here it differs from an experimentalist's approach. Those familiar with the experimentation or have heard about experimental approach would know that there is a school of thought usually referred to by the name of Heisenberg principle, which says that you cannot study a phenomenon without disturbing it. So a case study differs from an experimental approach and some of the other approaches in the sense that a case writer tries not to disturb the original setting. He tries to preserve the antecedents, the mediating, the consequent effects of a case, of a situation, and yet tries to observe, describe, evaluate, research, or help policy makers or decision makers with this effort. Anthropologists also use different cultures, different societies, environments, and histories to attempt an analysis of a specific kind of development. This again is different from experimental approach, where the experimentalist would try to use as less number of variables as possible, because this experimental fellow is after getting the pure and pronounced effect of the so-called independent variable, the effect of which he or she is trying to see on dependent variables while controlling the extraneous variables or environmental variables. What are the reasons for writing a case? One reason is gap analysis. Newer cases help close the gap between the theory and pedagogy. The second is serendipity. Serendipity is just a fancy label for what comes to us by luck or by chance. And this, according to me, is a very important factor for all the scholars interested in case writing, case studies. Because much like photography, you have to be ready with your camera. You never know when a good scene or a good opportunity passes you by and you miss the opportunity. For whatever reason, a situation presents itself that seems too good to pass up. Chance, fate, destiny, karma, providence, luck, fortune, coincidence, or accident all add up to that snapshot. And a good scholar has to be ready all the time with the antenna and radar ready to catch that snippet of life. A good case study should be differentiated from fiction writing. There are very good pieces of literature that are acknowledged the world over. People have accepted it, praised it, bought books, but a good case has to be differentiated. I will give you at least one example from my own observation at the end about how a particular incident came to my notice that I think was one of the greatest marketing strategy that I have ever come across, be it in books or be it in actual practice. Wait for some time and I will tell you about that. What are the objectives? And this is the serious patch that is coming up in my talk. These two names, Marjano and Bloom. Marjano talks about the thinking process, and Bloom gives a taxonomy of how and what kind of objectives should be there. According to Marjano et al., the detailed reference is here for both. And according to Marjano, this process of thinking is composed of two parts: acquiring knowledge and applying knowledge. And both these processes are important integral components of a good case, or at least they should be taken as two essential objectives of the case, or cases if you have more than one. Marjano identified 21 core thinking skills, which they group into 8 categories. And those 8 categories are here. You can quickly read them if you can read this screen. I'm trying to save on time that has been allotted to me. They are self-explanatory. Coming to Bloom's taxonomy, the other scholar, he presents a hierarchical approach in which each category, each subsequent category, is assumed to include behavior that is more complex, abstract, or internalized than the previous category. There are essentially 2 embedded hierarchical superordinate categories, cognitive and affective. Briefly, they are these 2 categories in 2 domains. In these 2 green paragraphs, knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, they come in the cognitive domain. So look for what the writer of a case has included in the case writing. And this is the affective domain, consisting of receiving, responding, valuing, organization, and characterization. These can be quantitative or qualitative, based on internal consistency or external factors, measured against other standards or against criteria that one develops for himself or herself. Case characteristics and educational objectives. Matching the case in an institute like this, Amity, where you write cases or collect cases and try to match them with educational objectives. You will see that this starts with category 2 and not category 1. The reason is the following. The first column, educational objectives, if it had been there, begins with category 2 rather than category 1. This is because category 1 is equivalent to Bloom's knowledge, the ability to remember. In Bloom's terminology, knowledge stands for the ability to remember. You may not agree with this definition, but this is how Bloom has operationalized his scheme of things. In the cognitive hierarchy, I am receiving the lowest in his affective hierarchy. Therefore, category 1 could include recall of abstract principles and learning key vocabulary definitions for the field, Marjano's knowledge acquisition. All of these are essential components of the learning process, but it is not necessary to use a case to accomplish them. In fact, a case is an inefficient way to transmit facts and definitions if it is the sole purpose of writing a case. So coming back to the chart, these are the categories corresponding educational objectives, case descriptions, data dimensions associated with them, analytical methods applicable, and value dimensions attached to them. So category 2, 3, 4 are here, and then 5, 6, 7, and 8. Those 8 categories that we talked about earlier, this one. So if the educational objective is finally the highest level, 8th level, develop mature judgment, wisdom, something like a person in the position of our honorable guest, Shri Lali Sahab, would have to do as the CEO of one of the very important media segment of Indian democratic system. He would perhaps look at a case where you would have to develop mature judgment, wisdom. Unlike students whose objective would be something like in this second category, develop concepts or understanding techniques. So if the need be, This one, the eighth one, develop mature judgment and wisdom. Then the case description would include complex, realistic, unstructured problems. Data dimension, you can see, and analytical method, no known satisfactory technique. It is hoped that by the time one reaches to a position where the educational objective becomes developing judgment and wisdom, one would be able to make use of his own discretion and arrive at a technique that would suit the requirement of the purpose. To summarize, the objectives include the choice of objective itself, that is whether a specific knowledge that the student should be taking away, or the educational objectives that are helpful in more generalizable skills and abilities as they are developing. And also the choice of types, whether the case needs to be descriptive, evaluative, decision-focused, or research-oriented. Now, this was related to when you are operating in the domain of library kind of research based on available data, based on available analysis, including the kind of case analysis that you get in scholarly journals like Harvard Business Review. Now, coming to moving from available to contributed, that is, I'm done with what is already available to me, and I'm ready to contribute to this field of case-based analysis and research. So this segment talks about the research-related aspects of case study. And as you can see, gathering data, making contact, and these are very important aspects. Please look at the screen. The promises that one makes to the contact person, they are very important. In the process of a continuing episode of case writing, it is known in research institutions that people who look for data make false promises to their contact person in the field. And that is the most dangerous thing to do, because false promises, once not kept, twice not kept, third time you approach, or somebody like you who is even more needy than you approaches the field and gets actually beaten up and thrown away, and the whole process of knowledge generation is jeopardized. Advantages and disadvantages of case research. 7 key factors that make case research a rich tradition. They include abilities to focus on issues and subjects, focus on the dynamic interaction of the situation, study a situation at a point in time, study a series of actions over a period, study the aspects of a situation, probe a situation in depth, and corroborate theories. These advantages are usually not available to the extent of the richness a case study offers in other methods like experimental field studies, survey research, etc., etc. These are the advantages. You can study in a realistic setting. It tells you not only what happened, but also why it happened. Allows you to contextualize in the environment, allows greater depth of understanding than most other methods, including survey research, and also allows understanding of complex processes in their entirety, that is, in a holistic perspective. Disadvantages. Difficulty in generalizing. Case research can provide analytic generalization, but not a statistical generalization. reliability of research is difficult to demonstrate because the circumstances surrounding the research are so difficult to replicate. The earthquake in Bhuj, the riot in West Bengal. Reliability requires replication of incidents, and most subjects that give rise to significant case studies, they are difficult to replicate. Mostly they happen naturally in natural settings due to a plethora of complex variables, factors, circumstances operating together simultaneously, synchronously, and very sporadically and rarely. So difficult to replicate. So those were the difficulties. Now here is the good news. What is the good news? There has been a remarkable growth in the methodology and research literature in the area of qualitative research in last few years, and there is undoubtedly a great future for this approach, which is a majoristic ground for the case research. I seriously advise you to equip yourself with the literature available in the area of qualitative research. Everybody has again heard about this slogan, qualitative research. But believe me, in the last 5 years, the area of qualitative research has grown to a much larger extent compared to what quantitative research had grown in the last 100 years. So please look up the literature. SAGE publishes a lot of books in this area, and there are very good journals available, and there are methods available like narrative analysis, grounded theory, narratives, grounded theory, etc., etc. Ethnography, and each one of them are very, very complex and large areas as of today. So I request you kindly to look up the actual richness of the research literature available today. It is not that easy as many people might think. It is not just narrating few lines and it becomes qualitative. No, not anymore. Case study research. It has these essential ingredients, and the sequence goes in this fashion, depicted by arrows. Some of them are two-headed arrows. For instance, one between prepare and collect, two-headed arrow, and collect and analyze, double-headed arrow again. Others are single-headed arrows. So these are essential ingredients, and in any case, study writing or reporting, this should be kept in good perspective. Planning includes these. Identify research questions. Decide to do case study method compared to the other methods. Understand its strengths and limitations. When to use case research? This is a comparative chart, and look at the last green segment. I don't know whether it is clearly visible. Probably I made a wrong choice of color. It looked nice on. Okay. Compare this with others, and especially the experimental. In all other aspects, it is like experimental, except the difference between column number 2, actually column number 3, but with numeral 2, requires control of behavioral events. If yes, you use experimental. If the requirement is no, then you use case study. And this is what gives you a map of when to use case study as against experimental survey, archival analysis, history. And coming to design from this, the second block in the second line. Design includes these many things. I hope you can read quickly. I am not reading them for you. This comes, prepare the other block in that diagram. The important point to note is the second point, train for a specific case study needs. For instance, studying organizational development and studying organizational disaster may require different kind of skills in terms of approach, in terms of contacts, in terms of history record, in terms of archival analysis, in terms of narratives, etc. And one should train himself or herself. Protocol is something like a parallel to a questionnaire. A questionnaire in a survey research gives you a kind of a standard approach to asking questions. So similarly, a case study protocol is a kind of charting out of steps or the questions to be asked or data to be collected so that the inter-collector reliability is maintained over a period, and if the same kind of data collection is being done at more than one location. And gain approval for human subjects protection. Not like police informers that police tells you, oh, you tell me everything, I'm going to protect you, and the next day the criminal shoots that informer. That should not be happening in case studies. Collect. Use these elements. People have studied Godhra. People have studied Tibetan refugees. And in that, collection of physical artifacts serves a major purpose. And this is one thing people oftentimes ignore. Analysis includes these things. Analytic techniques include pattern matching, explanation building, time series analysis, logic models, cross-case synthesis. Last thing is sharing your case study. Unless you share your case study, it remains in your private property and doesn't serve much purpose. So sharing in a meaningful and legally permitted way is very essential. There comes something called suspense as a way of composing your textual matter, and since this is something new, it is like this. A suspense structure is an interesting way applicable mostly to explanatory case studies, as descriptive case study has no specific, especially important outcome. This structure inverts the linear analytic structure. The direct answer or outcome of a case study and its substantive significance is paradoxically presented in the initial section of the chapter. The remainder of the case study and its most suspenseful parts are then devoted to the development of an explanation of this outcome. Used well, the suspense approach is often an engaging compositional structure. This is a way of writing which is not very well practiced in our business schools, and since this is one of the important structural schemes, probably it will do us some good if we practice this one. What makes an exemplary case study. The case study must be significant, the case study must be complete, the case study must consider alternative perspectives, the case study must display significant evidences, the case study must be composed in an engaging manner. Engagement, enticement, and seduction are unusual but essential features of an exemplary case. Inspiration, enthusiasm, and passion on part of case writer, and these cannot be learned usually. But my conviction is, given the right kind of atmosphere, it can be learned. With this, I come to an end of the presentation, but there remain two stories to tell you. Both of them actually are to elaborate my initial exposition of what I call serendipity. I will tell you one story, and I will give you one narrative here, and with that I will stop. Those narratives are very interesting. Long ago, about 5-6 years back, I was in Ayodhya, and in Ayodhya, everybody understands Hindi? Okay. In Ayodhya, there was a seller who was selling bear. I don't know what is the English. Bear की अंग्रेजी क्या होती है? Berry. Berries are of several kinds, blueberries and raspberries and strawberries, but our bear, you know what I mean, the Desi North Indian bear. So this thela wala was selling bear in the morning. Gooseberry. Gooseberry? I have never seen a goose eating those berries. Maybe no goose has even seen that berry. Well, we'll have to find out. Okay, so we understand the scenario. That bear, a thela wala was selling that bear. आइए साहब बेर ले लीजिए, ताजे हरे बेर ले लीजिए, मीठा बेर ले लीजिए, and I don't remember the price. Just for example's sake, let's say the price was 350 rupees a kilo at that time. I don't remember, but let's say it was 350 rupees. So 3 rupees 50 paisa a kilo, let's say. 3 rupees 50 paisa a kilo. आइए साहब ताजे हरे बेर ले लीजिए बेर ले लीजिए. ठीक है, he was able to sell some bears, but he would buy bears in a huge sack, and not all bears would be sold. So gradually, over 3 days, those bears would become stale, yellow, and rotten. And then, since I was staying there for 5-6 days, I could identify that thela wala, and that this is the man. And I was very attracted toward his way of propagating, marketing his merchandise. And there is a place in Ayodhya called Kanak Bhavan. There is a house which is touted to be as a house given to Sita ji as her muh dikhai or something, as a gift to her. So that Kanak Bhavan is another place of pilgrimage where people who visit Ayodhya, they go to Kanak Bhavan also. So one evening I also visited that Kanak Bhavan during my stay of 7 days, and in the evening I would see this same thela wala who used to sell those fresh green bears in the morning, 3.5 रुपया kilo, पीले सड़े हुए बेर, सूखे सड़े गीले पीले बेर उसके ठेले पर रखे हुए. And there were lots of monkeys around that Kanak Bhavan in Ayodhya. And then he would have a stooge, a confederate, who would buy some bears from him and start feeding those monkeys. And he would shout, आइए साहब बेर ले लीजिए, हनुमान जी को खुश कीजिए, पुण्य कमाइए, हनुमान जी को बेर खिलाइए. Not monkey, हनुमान जी. Playing upon your religious emotions. And आइए साहब बेर ले लीजिए, हनुमान जी को खिलाइए. And would you believe that सड़ा हुआ बेर he was selling for 8 रुपए 50 पैसे. ताजा बेर 3.5 रुपए, सड़ा हुआ बेर 8.5 रुपए. And which marketing strategy book tells you this strategy, you tell me? Kotler or whatever. So that was one. That's what I call serendipity. By accident, I meet this. And Lali Sahab has left. I wish he were here because he is chief of one of the biggest media. This is another media, print, newspaper print. I have no printing press. I have not printed it at my home press. I was coming in Lucknow Shatabdi yesterday, and this was being given as a gift to the travelers. So every news, in some sense, is a case, isn't it? You describe a situation. But depending upon who is the consumer, and if there are consumers like Lali Sahab, or a student, or a CEO of a unit of this great organization, MIT, like Dr. Sanjay Srivastava, depending on the purpose, the vision, the utility that a case would have, believe me, this is a printed news item, and I'm just going to read this out and leave the implication and outcomes to you. And I will also leave this newspaper with Dr. Sanjay Srivastava. You can take a printout later on, photocopy. And this, believe me, this is actual newspaper kept in Shatabdi yesterday. News item, if you can see. Second page, third page actually, and very big prints. What is the news? दबंग किसान ने गोली मारकर कुत्ते को मौत के घाट उतारा. न्यूज आइटम. दबंग किसान ने गोली मारकर कुत्ते को मौत के घाट उतारा. And this is how the news reads. काकोरी के रहमान खेड़ा गांव में मंगलवार की शाम एक पालतू कुत्ते ने किसान की भैंस को काट लिया. तो झल्लाए दबंग किसान ने अपनी लाइसेंसी बंदूक से उस कुत्ते को गोली मार दी, जहां उसकी मौत हो गई. उधर इस घटना की सूचना पाकर पुलिस मौके पर गई तो किसान बंदूक छोड़कर वहां से फरार हो गया. हालांकि पुलिस बंदूक को अपने कब्जे में लेकर अभियुक्त की तलाश में जुटी है. बताया जाता है कि जिस किसान के पालतू कुत्ते ने एक दूसरे किसान की भैंस को काटा था, ये दोनों आपस में सौतेले भाई हैं. यह घटना रहमान खेड़ा काकोरी में मंगलवार की शाम को तब हुई जब किसान अबू समद खां के पालतू कुत्ते ने अपने मालिक के मकान की तरफ से होकर निकली किसान नदीम खां की भैंस को दौड़ाकर काट लिया. उधर खुद की भैंस के समद खां के कुत्ते द्वारा काटे जाने की जानकारी जब नदीम खां को हुई तो वह आग बबूला हो गए और उन्होंने अपने घर जाकर लाइसेंसी बंदूक निकाली तथा अबू समद के दरवाजे पर जाकर इनके कुत्ते को गोली मार दी, जहां उस कुत्ते की मौके पर ही मौत हो गई. इस घटना के बाद जब अबू समद व नदीम के बीच जमकर कहासुनी हुई, तभी अबू समद ने इस घटना की सूचना काकोरी पुलिस को दे दी. I hope we remember that this Kakori was also famous for the famous Kakori bum कांड. उधर मौके पर गई पुलिस नदीम को तो पकड़ नहीं सकी, लेकिन अपने घर पर बंदूक छोड़कर फरार हुए नदीम की बंदूक पुलिस ने अपने कब्जे में जरूर ले ली. उधर गोली लगने से हुई खुद के पालतू कुत्ते की मौत के बाद अबू समद ने पुलिस को बताया कि नदीम ने जान से मारने की नियत से उनकी बहन पर गोली चलाई थी, लेकिन गोली उनके कुत्ते को जाकर लगी, जिससे उसकी मौत हो गई. फिलहाल नदीम इस घटना के बाद से ही फरार है, जिसकी पुलिस जल्द ही गिरफ्तारी का दावा कर रही है. So whatever you make out of this case, to me this is a case. Getting hold of this case is an example of serendipity to my mind, and depending on who is the user of this case, whether you decide to buy this news magazine or not, or become a lifetime subscriber, it's up to you. And here is the acknowledgement. I cannot leave my presentation with you because this is kind of copyright material of IIT Kanpur, but you can certainly copy the material from where I have copied. So please, please, especially for our student community, note these two names. Nomus and Nomus, 1999, and Yin, RK, 2009. This is rather recent. Both published from SAGE. If you look up the SAGE catalog available on net, you should be able to get both the books. If you don't feel like buying them, order them for your library. Very good books. There are, of course, other books, but you see, just two books, and you can get these many insights. Thank you.